Welcome to Training Unleashed, the show that will help you design and deliver training that's off the chain and will make a difference. Now, here's your host, Evan Hackel.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Training Unleashed. We're going to have another great episode today. Got a terrific guest. First, though, let me thank our sponsors, C-Suite TV and C-Suite Radio. They are really amazing sponsors, and without them, I couldn't do this show. My guest is Robin Rosenberg. She's the CEO and founder of Live in Their World, and she is a psychologist. And I think we're going to have a pretty interesting conversation. And let me just start off with Live in Their World. What does that mean? Why did you pick that as the name of your company?
Thanks for having me. The reason it's called Live in Their World is because the domain Walk in My Shoes was not available. Our program in part uses virtual reality. And what we do is allow people to literally be in the feet of people from different demographic groups and experience what it's like to be in the workplace and experience the effects of bias and incivility, disrespect, often unintentional. And so we wanted a name that really captured the emotional learning that is so powerful in that. And as I say, walk in my shoes wasn't available. So live in their world. We thought about live in my world, live in their world. But for most of it, it's walking in someone else's shoes and hence their world.
Yeah. Well, I actually like the name. So I like to think of scenario-based training, but you're really taking that to as a good way to train. You're really taking that to the next level.
Correct. The VR, virtual reality, is exquisitely good when it's well done at what we call emotional learning, which is really powerful and very different than cognitive learning. And for the kinds of skills that we are trying to reach, which are really basically about respect. There's inclusion, DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, but fundamentally those are really about respect and a willingness to learn what it means to be respectful for different people. Emotional learning is incredibly powerful.
I totally agree with you. And I have gone through a lot of emotional intelligence training, emotional experiential training myself. And, I'm a lifelong learner. And whenever you do experiential work, it has it makes a massive shift because you're shifting your being more than just shifting your intellect, so to speak. So I'm very intrigued with this. Is this training that has to be done like in your facility, or is this training that can be done anywhere?
So it can be done anywhere. Because of the pandemic and work from away, we had to pivot from using an Oculus headset in the workplace. So there are two additional ways people can have a VR experience. One is what's called a mobile VR, which is where you put your smartphone in what's called a mobile VR headset.
Yep.
And the other is just what's called immersive video. If you or your listeners have ever seen a YouTube 360 video, where you can kind of move around somewhat literally in a scene. So those, and no technology needed for that aside for a computer. So it can be done anywhere.
And is it leader led, or is it, something that's done SCORM based and done on a learning management system?
So it's actually done on our platform because we also provide cognitive learning, because emotional learning isn't enough, right?
Yeah.
It's powerful and it's really motivating. But what we want to do is really train habits, right? So that the idea is after a while, you don't even have to think about it, that it becomes automatic. So it's what's called distributed learning or drip learning over time. So it's all done on our platform, and it's scalable. We do have separate leadership training because leaders have additional responsibilities, if you will.
Yeah.
Individual contributors don't have, but for organizations in general, it's anyone can do it.
Well, that it sounds fascinating. Just it's in our company. We do augmented reality.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking forward to dabbling in virtual reality, but it's we're all pretty much e-learning as opposed to doing it. I don't know what your technology does, but it sounds like it's more of you're doing it and experiencing it. Is it more group or is it all one-on-one?
So it's what we might call low touch, which is individuals come onto our platform and they go through our program in small amounts over time.
Ah.
So there's no. We do also offer leadership training that is kind of live, if you will, because of, and we also offer one-on-one coaching for the same executive coaching and as well as DEI coaching. But the VR related program is absolutely so low touch, it's no touch.
Yeah.
That and people just do it individually on their own time. Although we do recommend that teams or working groups go through it in the same cadence so that everybody understands what's expected. And then also becomes water cooler conversation because it's a lot of like, wow, I didn't know this, and wow, this was so yeah.
So and I know very little about your company, and obviously you're very innovative because there are not a lot of people that are successfully using VR training now, which I'm sure has our learners very, very, very interested. Is your expertise the training that you're providing or the modality? Meaning, if I wanted, as a company, I was looking to do virtual reality training, maybe on the customer experience or things that weren't emotional intelligence per se, but more about deep experiential experiences. In other words, do you create training for customers if I was somebody that wanted training, or is it really just your content that you do and you don't see yourself as a VR development company?
We're definitely not a VR development company. And even in this space, what we do is relatively unique. So there are VR companies that do what's called just-in-time learning. So if I need to learn how to fire someone, right?
Yeah.
If I've never done that before, you can use VR to run you through. We don't do that. We actually don't do any one and dones, so to speak, any one and done type of training. Our ambitions are broader and deeper.
Yeah.
And so what we are really about is creating a respectful work environment for everybody and upskilling people for that respectful engagement. It's a really fraught virtual workplace now for most people.
Oh yeah.
And even the most gifted of us can have a hard time having hard conversations. How do you give and take feedback about stuff that's charged? And so really that ultimately that's what we're trying to do is really upskill people. And so that kind of learning, you need a real curriculum, and it has to happen over time.
So your primary curriculum is around diversity, acceptance, inclusion, or do you have other types of? I'm just trying to understand your depth of offering.
So it's you could call it DEI, although I think fundamentally what we're actually about is respect in the workplace.
Yeah.
Because, jerks cannot discriminate, right? They can just be jerks. So it's DEI plus, if you will.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
If that makes sense, because it's, helping people when there's a jerk in the workplace. How do you deal with that? We do anti-sexual harassment training. We do leadership, what we call leadership for civility training in our leadership stuff, and also really leading well in a hybrid environment. And again, because of the inequity issues that come up that are particular to hybrid, that are on top of all of the other sort of, inclusion and inequity issues in a workplace. So it's broader. It's really about creating a respectful work environment.
Interesting. So, it's interesting when I do this, I rarely ask this many questions about the company itself.
Right.
Because most companies are, it's easy because they all fit in a square peg, right?
Right.
And you're a round peg, and I'm looking for that square hole. And so I just find your company fascinating. Do you, if I, let's just say, I had a company and I wanted to utilize you, would you do an investigation or understanding about the culture and create custom content if someone was big enough? Or is it essentially the same training for everyone? Because it and I'm not saying that's bad, by the way, because, the concepts I think are universal.
Right. For a big enough client, absolutely, we can do custom content. We have content in the pipeline that is, of course, easier to customize.
Yeah.
But even for existing content, yeah, we would. It's really interesting because we are quite different. Even in the VR, DEI space, what we're doing is different because we're not doing just-in-time learning. And so, but people we also collect data, I should say. I'm a psychologist, and so it's what I really want to do is move the needle.
Yeah.
Versus appear to move the needle. And so built into our program is data collection over time.
Yeah. So let's, for a moment, step away from the VR, which is to me like that shiny thing. I just want to talk about VR. But let's just talk about the training you do. Maybe some case studies. Don't mention the names of the companies because that's obviously not important. Mm-hmm. But, experiences the companies had, people have gone through your training. What are the results that companies see?
So part of what they see is subtle changes in behavior. So, for instance, these are examples that I know just personally, having talked to some people who'd done the training. So, in part of our program, there's something that you probably haven't ever experienced, but many women have, which is when a man comes over to your workstation, you're sitting, and he's looking at something on your computer with you, but his crotch is in your face. Unintentionally. Okay.
Unintentionally.
It's just sort of the way, the environment is to see the computer. And that can be quite uncomfortable. And it seems like,
by the way, men have a similar situation where a part of the woman's anatomy is in their face, which they don't necessarily want to be looking at either.
Great example.
Awkward.
Great example. So quite a number of men who did the relevant part of our training have told me that it was a very powerful experience having another man's crotch in their face. and so one of the things that they learned is in that situation, either we both sit together, we both stand together, we both, like easy fixes. These are subtle, but very powerful. And so, that's just one example of, these little behavioral changes that have a huge impact for people.
Yeah. So one of the reasons I'm asking this question is in a recent podcast, I interviewed I can't remember his name, but the CEO of VIA Group, which does a lot of DE&I training and consulting work. And the big thing that he really emphasized was that this wasn't just about socially good, but really about it being economically good for companies, that it helps you attract the right people, diversity of thought, it creates better products and better business.
Right. So there's a very significant research literature. So I'm a psychologist, so I think
Yeah, please.
That way on what's the cost of incivility, right? So incivility is kind of low level disrespect, right? So there's DEI again, and then there's the general jerkdom, right?
Yeah.
So incivility includes jerkdom as well as DEI, but the cost of incivility or lack of inclusion or whatever we want to call that bubble of stuff is unbelievably significant. It leads to, like 70 or 80% of people will try to avoid offenders, which gets into working group issues. If you're trying to avoid someone, they'll do a sort of work slowdown, for instance, oh, was I supposed to get back to you urgently? I'm sorry, I didn't see your email, right? Sort of payback.
Yeah.
Things that are really bad for the company, 12 to 15% pre-COVID of people quit because of incivility in the workplace. It's much higher now. You have attrition, and then there's the branding issues, right? Of what, for things like glass ceiling or just social media, when it's known that it's either a toxic work environment or non-inclusive work environment. It's really, really bad. We know there's, again, great data that when employees, when there is incivility, whatever form that takes, whether it's discriminatory or if you have customer-facing employees, they in turn take it out on customers, right? It's even unconscious. It's not necessarily, well, they did this to me, so I'm going to do this to the customer. It's like a contagion thing.
Yeah.
That is really detrimental to the work environment. So there are all kinds of indirect cost savings from really stepping up and making the workplace a better place to work for everyone. And then, of course, there are the lawsuits or the possibility of lawsuits. And so it really is risk mitigation to upskill everyone.
I think that the benefits are absolutely huge. And, it's interesting. Most people think who are managers that there's no issues, but that's not the reality. There's no issues in their mind because they're the ones in power.
Right.
And
we all have blind spots. In fact, that's one of the action items for leaders and managers is to regularly be asking, in team meetings, what are we missing? Right. It's to be open to that feedback and recognizing how are things go, like just what are we missing on whatever our strategic goals are, whatever the project is, but it's also how are we doing here?
Yeah.
As a working group.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And, the other thing I think organizations fight with all the time is high producer who exhibits insensitivity.
Right.
And it can be a major issue, and I've watched companies avoid it, and it's ultimately never a good idea, at least my experience.
It's never a good idea. And honestly, in this day and age, even high performers who are either jerks or discriminatory or, whatever, understand that it's really not okay. You can just peg part of their compensation to how inclusive are they or how respectful are they, right? They can be high performers, but there are ways to shift the incentive structure.
Yeah.
I've coached people who, fundamentally didn't quite understand. And I think if they're at all open to learning, they get it, right? With good training or coaching, you're not in opposition to them, but it's like, oh, you mean I could be an even higher performer if only I, tweak these things that I do that get in my way of being even better.
Yeah. It's interesting, the conversation, because I think everyone clearly understands when someone is sexually harassing someone or someone's bullying somebody and it's blatant. But what you're really talking about is the unconscious, unintentional bias and impact that has inside companies.
Right.
And
as well as the obvious.
Yeah.
What can be obvious to others isn't necessarily obvious to oneself. And to your point, I think that there are work environments where leaders or managers look the other way. So it is blatant, it is obvious, and everyone knows, but the incentive structure hasn't shifted to make it actually unacceptable. And so we're trying to be in that space as well, so that there's what's called social accountability, which is when a whole working group or a whole organization or division does our program, everybody becomes crystal clear about what's supposed to happen, right?
Yeah.
And so everyone is now aligned toward that, and it's much more obvious and kind of a lot more raised eyebrows for behavior that was allowed before. So
let's go back to VR, because I'm very interested to me.
Sure.
If, let's say, I'm a company, I want to work with you, we're essentially going to buy headsets that people put their cell phones into to work with your technology? Or is it more the kind of thing you were talking about earlier, where you kind of simulate without the headsets being necessary?
It's up to the company. The company decides which or how many of the three ways the VR content can be viewed. If they're in office and want to buy an Oculus headset and set it up in a stall, or a cubby and run people through, fine. If they want to ship some or all of their employees, mobile VR headsets, or just the company branded cardboard ones they can order, fine. If they want to give people a $20 budget and they can order, everyone orders it on Amazon, fine. Or they don't want to have any extra equipment and people watch it as immersive video on their computer, that's fine. You could give employees the choice. We actually let the company 100% decide how they want to do it.
So I'm going to ask a geeky question.
Yes.
Some of the concerns that I hear about VR is some people have issues watching it because they become uncomfortable and things of that nature. Do you run into that? Not
at all. So I am someone who gets motion sick unbelievably easily. When I fly, I have to take Dramamine. And so I'm the beta tester. In fact, what happens in our VR experiences is the person you are being doesn't move around in space. So you don't have any motion sick risk.
Okay.
Because I'm a psychologist, I've also been really careful, we don't want to traumatize anyone. And so have been really careful that way as well. It's emotionally very powerful, but it's not traumatizing. Yeah. So, we've been really
so when someone takes a course, is it like this lesson's like an hour and then you take another lesson, or the lesson's 15 minutes? How much time is it?
Got it. So, I've tried to use the science of learning and what we know, the science of psychology and what we know works and doesn't work with DEI interventions for all the different aspects of the program, including pacing, which is what you're talking about. One of the things we know is if any of your listeners or you've ever been to a conference, you know how by the afternoon you kind of can't really take in any more information.
Yeah.
You're sitting there and
you're re-recording over the information you already received.
Right. You're full, right?
Yeah.
The store is kind of closed. What we've tried to do is really make it self-paced. So when you've had enough, you can stop and the platform will pick up where you left off. So our methodology is what's called track-based. So we have a lot of different tracks and companies decide which tracks different working groups take and the order and blah, blah, blah. But even within a track, the whole track can take anywhere from an hour and a half to 2.25 hours, depending on reading speed for the emotional learning, the cognitive learning part and the data collection part, because we have questionnaires. And also how many questions people get wrong in the e-learning, because we really want people to learn. So we have adaptive learning where if you get key concepts wrong, of course, we always explain why every wrong answer is wrong.
Yeah.
But we'll test you again after we explain on some other facet. So it can take anywhere from an hour and a half to 2.25 hours, but and each track has 3 modules, which is more than you need to know. But the point is, for any part of the track,
Training Unleashed
when you've
is
had
brought to you
enough
by
for
Tortal
now, or
Training,
your phone is ringing, or
specializing
you have an
in
urgent
e-learning
call,
and interactive online
stop.
training solutions,
And then you
for
just come
corporate,
back to it
government,
and we ping you. There's a
nonprofit,
deadline
and
for each
franchise
track, and we just ping you as you're
Tortal
getting
makes
close and
effective
haven't,
training easier.
close to the
Just go to
deadline and haven't finished.
tortal.net to gain access
Because there's
to
no
real-world
virtue
tools
in your
that can make a difference.
blasting through it to get through it.
T-O-R,
Right. I mean, the VR
T-A-L,
part is compelling no matter
Tortal.net.
what. But the learning isn't happening when people are just trying to get through it. And so, we know that lots of one and done trainings, where they're one-off trainings, whether it's an hour a day, or 3 days. It's, first of all, one trial learning isn't enough for these kinds of more subtle, nuanced, contextual skills. But also when people have, when they've taken in what they can take in, they can't take in anymore. There's no virtue.
Yeah.
So we've really tried to address that in the pacing.
Well, I'll tell you some of the things I love about what you're doing. First off, it's clearly well done training, right? It's the best way to train. But the other thing that I like about it is because VR training is so new, that you're probably going to get a lot of senior executives just curious enough because they can really actually take the training. Because in a lot of companies, the biggest problem you have is senior management doesn't want to take the training. They're too busy, right? They're too busy.
Right.
And I would see this as something as, oh yeah, I can put on a headset. I can do this training. This would be really, cool. Now, whether that's true 10 years from now or not, I don't know, but I would see the adoption to be much easier than saying to somebody, you're just going to sit down and take, 2 hours of training on a traditional online university.
Exactly. And in fact, we it works best when leaders take the training first.
Oh yeah.
And so there is that curious piece. And your point is so well taken. About 10 years from now, who knows? I actually do wonder about what I call empathy fatigue in 10 years, to the extent that VR is really utilized a lot more. It'd be fascinating to see. Time will tell.
But it's interesting. 3D movies, which were all the rage, and I'm going, this is great. They're never going to go back. Every action movie in the world is going to be 3D for the rest of my life. And they have toned down. They don't do it as much. Some theaters don't show it, and apparently there are people that don't like it. I never would have experienced it. But it does sound like it's not like someone's riding a roller coaster in your VR training.
Right.
And
No.
and I do think seeing and experiencing things that you just really can't do on a two-dimensional format, makes a lot of sense.
Right.
Um,
The VR portions of each track are about 22 to 25 minutes. And that's because we really want people to see in scene after scene after scene that it's not just, oh, they're being so sensitive, right?
yeah,
What's the big deal here? That it just what the mental load is. So and also so what can I do differently? We're trying to upskill 3 different positions that all of us will be in a given work week, where the person who was often inadvertently disrespectful, right? And it's like, well, what should I do instead? Right. So it's
yeah,
great to understand what you did, but we need to tell you what to do instead, right? The kinds of things, right? There are many things you could do instead. Where the person who was disrespected, it's like, should I say anything? If I say something, should I say it in front of everyone else? Should I speak privately? And we sort of go through the permutations of what should I do? And then there's the bystander that we want to convert to an upstander, right? Which is, I see this, I get it. What should I do?
yeah.
And there are many ways to handle it in a positive way. So it's just giving people the tools so they can really deeply understand the underlying principles of
Yeah.
how to handle it.
So we are going to definitely run out of time here, but I'm sure that there are people that are very intrigued. So tell us a little bit about the company and how people reach you, and who are
Sure.
your ideal customers?
Great questions. Our ideal customers are really any organization that wants to upskill its employees to create a more respectful and better work environment, for virtual or not, for its employees. For our leadership training, again, is any company that really wants to do a deeper dive in helping leaders really get to the next level, and all of the good things that happen from that. Our website is liveintheirworld.com. You can reach me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Robin Rosenberg psychologist, although there are other Robin Rosenbergs. Our company is on LinkedIn. We're on Twitter. The other thing to know, we have a ton of articles and stuff on our website. The other thing to know is we always have either a white paper or an ebook available to download on our publications page as part of the thought leadership page. So by the time this comes out, the next one will be an ebook that is the psychology of leading with respect, better performance, and more engagement. And because I'm a psychologist, of course, I can't resist injecting the psychological underpinnings of this. And it's not just this is what you should do, but really let's understand human nature to understand why.
You have a podcast too, right?
I do. Thank you for mentioning that. I
Yeah.
forgot about that. It's called Their World.
Yeah.
And we interview people from various relevant walks of life to talk about things like inclusion and risk mitigation. Our actually first guest was an attorney, which was really interesting hearing his perspective on DEI work. So,
Yeah.
in its relation to risk mitigation. So you can reach me at Robin at Live in Their World. You can reach me in the contact page of our website. I guess through LinkedIn, you can reach me all kinds of ways.
A lot of there. So just for clarity, what's the smallest size company that's ideal to work for you, and the largest size company that's ideal to work with you?
I mean, we can work with a company of 10. I mean, it's really, and we can work with a company of, 100,000 plus. We need to deal with bandwidth issues for our platform for really, really large companies, but that's a problem we know how to solve. And so, yeah, we're infinitely scalable.
Cool. This is great. So as our listeners know, we always end our program with asking our guests, if you had one tip to share, what would that one tip be? So what is your one tip, Robin?
The one tip would be to really treat your colleagues and customers and business partners with respect, and be even more focused on that than you are, and watch and see the results.
So what you're saying is really pay attention to how respectful you can be, and then see the change. That's cool. I like that.
Right. It's encouraging people to be little mini scientists.
Yeah.
Like some data, right? A/B testing. You've been doing A, now try B and see what happens.
I do a thing where I put acknowledgement in my life. So I try to do deep acknowledgements, not like, so a simple acknowledgement would be, you were a great guest. I appreciate you for being on my show. And I think most people, you would know better than I, sometimes just let that breeze by as, yeah. But if I said, and I mean this sincerely, and I'll give you an acknowledgement, that you were a terrific guest because you really shared new ideas with the audience, and you take DE&I and really take it to the next level. You take technology to the next level. People listening to the show learned about a really appropriate use of VR technology. And they also learned, because you're not just about the technology, about emotional training and education and how to do it right. So people listening to the show really got a lot of benefit. You were a gift to the show and a gift to the listener.
Evan, let me respond in kind, which is, you have been an amazing host. It has been a real pleasure to know you. And I look forward to knowing you better.
Me too. With that, thank you for being a guest. I want to thank C-Suite Radio and C-Suite TV as being a sponsor. And of course, I want to thank all of you, the listeners. Without you, there wouldn't be a show. Everyone have a great day.